Well, I can't thank my team enough, and Mark and Zay and Stephen. This is going to be an exciting conversation. I handpicked some of the brightest minds in the veterinary space to join me, and really appreciate the level of innovation and disruption that we're seeing from all angles. I wanted to just start by kind of a quick little review, a little trigger for everybody to set the stage for the conversation. In the decades ahead, healthcare will undergo dramatic transformations. Medicine will become more precise. Value will shape care delivery. Pet parents will become empowered consumers. Digitalization will transform every aspect of veterinary care. Precision medicine will be highly customized and highly personalized based on genomics, connected feedback, and data. AI decision models fed by vast amounts of technology will improve diagnostic accuracy, and medical care will ultimately become anticipatory and proactive rather than emergent and reactive. I am excited to share this amazing panel with you, and I'm going to start by saying that we have two founders of two exceptional veterinary companies who have decided to look at flipping model and to do things differently. I'd like to start with Dr. Zay. I think that what I'd like to start with is to say that the legacy veterinary industry is trying to fix problems with a lot of incremental innovation. And I think Dr. Zay has a very strong opinion about what can be done on a more drastic level when you start with a de novo model. So Dr. Zay, thanks for joining us. And I'd love for you to share your journey with BondVet.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, happy to do so. I think to your point on incremental versus this more impactful change, I got to feel it firsthand. I was the veterinarian that knew that practice ownership would be in my future at some point in time. And so voyaged down the path of what an acquisition model would look like and how acquisitions are different than a de novo strategy to build things from the ground up. And what I found to be true was change is very, very hard to initiate. It felt very much like pushing a boulder up a hill when it came to a clinic that we acquired versus what we've done here in New York City, which is built from the ground up. So we just opened our 5th clinic, 3 on the way. And that was a much easier way to be impactful in New York City, which is full of lots of strong wills and strong minds as well. But what was really interesting was the 3 things that I set out to change from a design perspective, from a technology and operations perspective, and then most importantly, I think a workplace culture perspective. All of those were harder to achieve having acquired a clinic versus the path that we ended up taking, which was how do we build from the ground up and onboard team members the way we want them, onboard clients the way we want them, and build the technology from the ground up involved running through the veins of our facility to alleviate stressors on doctor teams. And something that I think I have learned along the way over the last couple of years is when it comes to being impactful in the veterinary space, which is absolutely my utmost goal, I'm not going to be able to do that alone. And if I'm able to share some of the processes and ways that we're impactful in our clinic teams and have others around us adopt those same processes, thereby having this exponential effect, I think that's how you change an entire industry.
Thank you, Zay. That's amazing. And Stephen, I think you've been on the verge of change for a lot longer than most people in the audience. So I think with what you did with Whistle as early as 2012, if I'm correct, you were ahead of the curve in understanding that there was something that was important about connecting with your pets. And I think that, you've done amazing things with Whistle, with Mars, and with your journey in the veterinary space, and your most recent adventure as a CEO of Modern Pet or Modern Animal in California. And I think that the thing that's really impactful in the way that I think you and I see the world is that consumerism is going to drive a lot of choice. So I'd love to share kind of how you see the legacy of the next 9 years kind of being driven by consumerism, and how we in the veterinary community might meet the pet parents where they want to be met.
Yeah, thank you, Audrey, and thanks everyone for joining. I think that the really interesting and unique thing about healthcare in the animal space that is not always appreciated is at the end of the day, it is a completely discretionary purchase. And no matter how much people will feel like they don't have a choice, they're going to spend the money on their pet. At the end of the day, when you're presenting a bill for $600 for a procedure, or $300 for some lab tests to a pet owner, you're presenting them to a consumer. It's not a patient the way in human healthcare you do, where they may not be paying very much out of pocket, if anything at all. And so at the end of the day, your client is really a customer, and you have to meet them where they are. Like otherwise that relationship has been eroded over the years as the rest of the world has opened up, has become more transparent, things have become more accessible. And so what we talk about a lot at Modern Animal is it's not even so much about the technology for technology's sake, and it actually never is. It's really about ultimately we talk about technology-enabled services, but we even take it one step further. It's about how do you make the humans that are both interacting on the side of the clients and the humans that are interacting on the side of the practitioners be more technology-enabled. And this is like a technology-enabled human question, which is always really interesting. And it is about ultimately enabling consumers to say yes to what is, again, a consumer discretionary purchase. And so the way you do that is you build trust, you have transparency, and you have to create accessibility. So for us, it's ultimately a question in increasing that access, while at the same time not burdening the veterinarian and where possible, actually alleviating a lot of the strain that is continuing to grow on the veterinarian as those consumer demands grow, as the desire for, one, just more care. Millennial pet owners are demonstrating to be more active and engaged pet owners than the generation before them. They have higher expectations. I'll never forget one of our doctors who joined in the first few days asked, how do we avoid Yelp? Can we just like turn off our Yelp accounts? Like, that's not how the world works anymore. I think you are there front and center, providing a service to someone who has to choose to say yes to you as a doctor. And I think the part of being a veterinarian that's gotten so hard is how do you get people to say yes when you are making the recommendation based off of your experience, your expertise, the oath that you've taken. And ultimately, the only way you're going to get people to hear you is through access. And that's where I think telemedicine and ultimately all technology in the veterinary space, that's the role that it's going to be playing over the years.
That's a great perspective. And I think, obviously you and Zay have kind of flipped the traditional model from the vet-centric to the consumer-centric. And I think that, the world of consumerism is kind of going towards that direction. At one of my tables, I had a millennial and she called herself the Amazon generation. And, she said, if things don't function like Amazon, they don't relate to my generation. And I think that that's a pretty powerful statement. Mark, now you're the one that gets to solve for how all of the veterinarians are going to be placed into these amazing veterinary opportunities. I think, there is inherently a shortage of veterinarians and a very inherent shortage of veterinary care teams. I think that the impactful conversation for us to have is how do we solve for this issue in the next 10 years? How will we see things happening in veterinary schools? Will it be solved through increased enrollment? Will new categories of care providers? What's your perspective on that?
Great question. And there actually are solutions. They'll take a little time, but they should be achievable before 2030. Number one, let's just get it on the table. Registered, certified, credentialed vet techs need to be paid more, period. And any veterinarian in the audience that doesn't like hearing this, I'm sorry. It has to be a sustainable career. It is for nurses. In the human medical system, their salaries have doubled really in the last 5 years. And you invest, you got to let your vet techs do more that they're certified to do, trained to do, than you allow. And that's something the profession itself controls, Audrey. And I just think until you do that, that leg of the stool is and going to, as we know now, after 5 to 6 years, walk out to a different profession despite their love for animal care and for animals, number one. Number two, unlike human medicine, which ladders all the way up from 2-year community college degrees to post-fellowships and residencies, veterinary medicine basically has 2-year degree credentialed vet techs and DVMs 8 years out from high school and nothing in the middle. And it doesn't make sense. Human medicine has PAs, you have nurse practitioners, and so forth. We need to create a mid-level extender, a master's degree that has a wide range of responsibilities. They're not DVMs, but they understand medicine. They're trained in a good deal of the medicine side of the equation. And small practices, large practices, everything in between would take advantage of this. There's no good argument not to. So we're going to begin to see pilots, one of which at Lincoln Memorial University's Veterinary College, within the next year, and I think you'll start to see that change. The third challenge is real simple. We need more veterinarians. I think we're between 5 and 7 veterinarians short right now. It puts great stress. It creates burnout, even more serious mental and emotional issues than just burnout. And frankly, again, known for some bluntness, the accreditors don't understand that we have every year at least 3,000 applicants that could do great in veterinary school. They've maybe dreamed since childhood to be veterinarians, and they're not given a spot, and they otherwise academically qualify. And there's no good out of that. We have 32 really good vet schools in this country. They don't need to be micromanaged by accreditors to say, do this, do that. If they want to grow, let them grow. Honestly, let them grow and let the profession have access to professionals. We're losing about 2,000 baby boomer veterinarians a year, many because they've sold their practices. Congratulations, good that happened. And, the accreditors need to step up and say, good schools doing a good job. If you want to grow, we'll let you grow. It's not our job to stop that growth out of some, theoretical concern that might be 20 years old as to the model of teaching that they have in mind. I'm very involved in veterinary education, as you know, Audrey, and I can just tell you that the profession, well, first of all, pet owners are about 10 years ahead of the profession. The profession's about 10 to 10 years ahead of the accrediting process. And sorry, they may believe that this is unfair criticism, but let's be honest tonight, that's a bottleneck, and we need more vets. We need vet techs to increase, and that's going to require compensation. That's real world compensation. And then we need to create a mid-level extender. Other than that, it's easy.
Sounds good. You fix that problem and we'll all be happy. And Mark, I think, one of the relevant points, one of the underpinnings there is kind of the happiness project of our veterinary community. And I think, if we strategically look at how we can solve for kind of de-stressing the veterinarian and creating larger care centers around them that can be collaborative and supportive for them, then I think we solve for a lot of complexities. So thank you so much for that insight. Zay, I'm going to turn back to you. I think we've talked a lot about technology tonight, and I think one of the things that people have a lot of caution about when you talk about the digitization of the universe is, how do we continue to have that emphasis or that engagement factor that still has that personalization and still has kind of that love of provider? And so what I would challenge to you is how do you think that virtual care disintegrates or authenticates kind of that trusted relationship, and how do you speak to the people who say it's going to become a more digital robotic society instead of a more familial embrace society if we have too much digitization?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've touched on it a little bit when we're thinking about, Mark earlier speaking to the ethics, the strong ethics that doctors have. I think the nature of veterinary medicine as a whole just being so high touch. I don't know that there exists a world where a doctor is not involved as strongly with that human touch component in the pet process. But what I think we can do is actually create worlds where we are alleviating pressures off of our doctors, allowing for greater sustainability in the industry. What we're seeing a lot of with this turnover of our doctors in general in the industry is that it stems from feeling like there's a lot of administrative burden, there's a lot of extra work that they're having to do. And I think that there is strong value in advocating for the pet owner taking some of that responsibility of our place. I think that there's value in being able to say, how do we turn our operations around and rely more heavily on technology to support our doctors so that they feel more empowered in their roles and less like they have to consistently advocate for the pet. And I mean, I think back to Audrey, just conversations that you and I had, years back even, where you are very vocal about how much you believe that we are not at the end of our limits when it comes to what veterinary medicine can actually do for providers, and how we actually can both appeal to the client population at the same time, bring more information so that doctors can practice medicine a little bit more. And so I think about, to your question, is there a world where we alleviate the doctors so much that they're just not involved in the process? I don't know. I think that human component will probably always exist in what we do, just by nature of who we are and what we're doing and who we're providing care for. But I do think that we can alleviate the stressors that allow for greater sustainability in the industry.
I think that's a phenomenal way to look at it. And I think, as we look towards having, a predominant gender shift towards females and looking at kind of what that work-life balance and how to manage the task of being a mom and how to look at, how do you manage a job? I think some of those opportunities of having the ability to participate in virtual care and having kind of a hybrid lifestyle in clinic and virtual is kind of a magical moment, right? And I think it's been something that a lot of us have been able to touch during COVID because we've realized how effective and efficient we can be on a computer and on a phone. So thank you so much for your perspective.
Yeah, I was going to say that was when we dove in. It was a crash course in telehealth and how we allow for doctors to have a better quality of life. A lot of the doctors on our team that have children, that was a reason for them to take some of our initial telehealth shifts, and we saw a great quality of improvement for them quite instantly because now the pressure's alleviated. And so that's agreed. That's how we have to think about it.
Yeah, I think, we look at the positive and really focus on what this can do, not what it could do from a destructive standpoint. Because for me, I think that there's so many silver linings that we have to move forward. Hey, Steve, one thing I would love to talk about is, I mentioned earlier that you were so engaged in the wearables and in creating something so ahead of its time. I would love for you to kind of put on your lens of what the future looks like. And I think, when we talk about connected care, we talk about the impact of what all of these different levels of connectivity could do to empower practitioners, telemedicine, and to give them information and feedback loops. So would love to know your perspective on kind of what you think some of those opportunities might look like. And you don't have to share with us anything that you might be inventing secretly.
The good news is there's no secrets. I think that there's been this tendency to want to lean on some crazy future technology that's going to sort of drop in to the veterinary industry, and it's going to either disrupt or transform or help bring the future to us. And the reality is, I think that's not really going to happen, at least not in the way that I think a lot of times over the years I would hear people talk about it. What we learned with Whistle was that could we build a device that would track a bunch of different behaviors and tell you when the pet, the animal's having some health condition ahead of when you would otherwise discover it. And the reality is, what's been blocking the ability for that animal to get care is the accessibility to the veterinarian, is not the quality of the data or the information, especially now with pet being, during COVID and just in general, I think the younger audiences I was describing being that much more engaged with their pets. They see things before, anyone else will, right? So I think the question is, how do you get the pet owner, the consumer, the client's case to actually have access? And it's still a technology question, right? But it's a technology and an operational question to unlock medicine. It's less about putting the power in the pet owner's hands of diagnosing, putting the power in the hands of a veterinarian who is on the other end of virtual care consultation. The power is already there. And I think this is where a lot of the VCPR stuff comes into play, which is just the doctor knows, am I about to make a diagnosis on something that I just shouldn't be because I have no idea what's going on? Or are they in a place where it's pretty obvious? And in that case, no amount of technology is going to help. What's going to help is that connection actually happening in a timely fashion and in an affordable way too. I mean, the other piece of this is, I'll hear a lot of veterinarians complain about telemedicine enabled consultations because they will, how am I generate the production that I normally would for that time slot? And what they're missing is, I think there's a lot of benefits that come with you taking that time slot at home, in the comfort of your home, or just in general, not having the strain of being in the clinic. And maybe that's not a fit for you, but there's plenty of veterinarians out there where that is a great fit for them. And so how does that hybrid model work, where there's some people who are providing that, whether it's through a third-party service, and then you in the practice are focusing on the medicine in the practice. Maybe you're doing both. And by doing that, you're actually allowing yourself to really optimize production when you're in the practice and optimize your time when you're not, by, in 5 minutes being able to quickly diagnose something that otherwise would have led to a 30-minute appointment in person with your technician staff being there supporting you, and being kind of a waste of time for everybody.
Yeah,
I don't think it's it's not about AI. It's not about data. It's not about gadgets. I think that the reality is data is really valuable, but data is really valuable for the way that Mark presented data to all of us, right? Can we make better decisions about our business, our profession, our industry? We use a lot of data at Modern Animal. We have a data analyst, probably not something that, a year into, it's our 1 year anniversary at the clinic today. And it's not something that most clinics 1 year in have on their team. But that data is serving our team to build better solutions and to optimize the experience for our clients, but even more so for our staff. It isn't to create an AI solution to actually diagnose and eliminate the veterinarian, who absolutely still is at the center of the entire experience.
Perfect note to end on and hand it back to Catherine. I can't thank you enough, Zay and Stephen. Thanks for joining us this evening. I think the conversation has just begun. So